테스트 하나 둘 테스트.
셋 테스트 하나 둘 셋 마이크를 시음하고 있습니다. 하나 둘 마이크 시음 중입니다. 마이크 테스트 하나 둘 마이크를 시음하고 있습니다. 하나 둘 하나 둘 하나 둘 마이크를 시음하고 있습니다. 하나 둘 하나 둘
minutes. Good morning. We are now beginning the first international conference for contemporary Korean studies. I am Professor Yohan Yu from the Department of Religious Studies at Seoul National University and the leader of the Value and Identity team within the SNU Contemporary Korean Studies project. We will start with a brief opening ceremony. First, we will hear a welcoming address from President Hong-lim Ryu of Seoul National University. But unfortunately, it will be delivered via video. President Ryu is unable to attend in person due to an overseas business trip, and he sends his sincere apologies for this.
Good morning, honored guests, esteemed scholars, and dedicated researchers. I am Hong-lim Ryu, President of Seoul National University. It is my great honor to welcome you to the International Conference for Contemporary Korean Studies, hosted by Seoul National University. On behalf of SNU community, I'd like to extend special thanks to the researchers from abroad. As we explore multidisciplinary research agenda for future Korean studies, your presence would serve as an inspiration. I also express my gratitude to Professor Youngwon and the entire project teams for their dedication to this significant research initiative and conference. Global interest in contemporary Korea is currently higher than ever before. Korea's remarkable economic growth and dynamic democratic development have long garnered worldwide attention. Additionally, Korean culture, including K-dramas, K-music, and Korean cuisine, is captivating global audiences. Reflecting this trend, major universities, especially in the United States and Europe, have shown unprecedented interest in Korean studies, with a surge in students enrolling in Korean studies courses and programs. This increasing demand has also led to a rise in the appointment of educators and researchers in this field. Global interest in Korea should go beyond mere curiosity about a country with a success story. It should lead to systematic and in-depth academic explorations and greater achievements. With Korean studies receiving increasing global attention, this conference, which brings together top minds from around the world, across various disciplines to discuss Korea's unique appeal and complex challenges is both timely and promising. Seoul National University has a distinguished history of dedicating tremendous effort and intellectual resources to the study of Korean history and literature, particularly through our renowned institution, Gyujanggak. Now, expanding on this foundation, SNU wants to push forward to taking a leading role in addressing the new global demand for contemporary Korean studies and establishing it as a distinct academic field. Contemporary Korean studies at SNU should encompass a broad range of interests, from politics, economy, society, culture, and religion to engineering and technology. To achieve this goal, we must foster broader interdisciplinary studies. Moreover, contemporary Korean studies should not merely treat Korean cases as unique, isolated research subjects, but should also enrich our understanding of universal human experiences. By comprehensively analyzing the characteristics of Korean society and culture and their interactions with global trends, we can better understand humanity's common concerns and propose both theoretically and practically effective solutions. In this sense, we can assert that such contemporary Korean studies are not only future-oriented, but also globally relevant. As a hub of contemporary Korean studies, Seoul National University aims to explore new directions in this field and present a vision for the future alongside you. I sincerely hope that this academic conference will contribute to the advancement of contemporary Korean studies, and I pledge my continued support for the future endeavor. I firmly believe that this conference will serve as a cornerstone for a new leap forward in Korean studies. And I hope that your esteemed expertise and profound insights over the next 2 days will elevate our discussion on studying Korea, bringing significant benefits to both our country and the global community. Thank you.
Yeah, he promised constant support, I think about that. Next, Professor Youngwon, the director of the SNU Contemporary Korean Studies Project, will deliver the second welcoming address. Please give him a big hand.
This is a real voice, not an on-air voice. Very good to see you, all of you. Let's see. Good morning. How's your last night? Good? Good. Welcome to Seoul National University. This is Youngwon. I'm the chair of Seoul National University Contemporary Korean Studies program. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our esteemed guests, both domestic and international, who are leading scholars in contemporary Korean studies. Your presence at this conference is truly an honor, and we deeply appreciate your participation. Since 2023, many scholars at SNU interested in Korean studies have recognized the need to develop and improve Korean studies. Since then, we have continuously developed various plans to address the growing demand for the understanding and analyzing modern contemporary Korea society. Interest in contemporary Korea has never been higher around the world. This growing interest spans multiple fields, including not only cultural phenomena such as K-pop, K-drama, but also other subjects like Korean economic development and democracy and religion. Although there is increasing intellectual interest and demand for various aspects of Korean society, existing research and education in Korean studies have mainly focused on Korean language and old history. I believe now is the time to expand the scope, the content of our research and education. And now is the time to recognize the experience of Korean society more comparatively within the universal context of human history, rather than Korean particularism. I'm pretty much confident that today's international conference will be the first step toward achieving our goals. This project aims to establish a global organization for Korean studies for comprehensive, comparative, and multidisciplinary studies on contemporary Korean society. I truly believe SNU Global Organization will serve as the center of interconnected global network of researchers, while at the same time, we will connect research and education. Our project will not be possible without invaluable support and guidance from all of you. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to each of you. Please enjoy this conference. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Kwon. I will be helping Professor Kwon oversee the entire program of the conference over the next 2 days. I have just one request. Please ensure that each session concludes within the designated time. Your punctuality will be greatly appreciated. The first session, presented by the Value and Identity team, will begin shortly. Please prepare.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session of the Seoul National University's inaugural International Conference on Contemporary Korean Studies. My name is Song Chong Lee. I'm an associate professor of religious studies. Before starting our session, I'd like to remind you of the larger objective of the conference. Our goal is to rejuvenate and redirect the discourse on Korean studies with a renewed focus on contemporary issues and concerns. As part of this collective institutional effort with the 7 research clusters, our team for the first session is going to present a discussion titled Reimagining Korea, Identity and Values in a Changing World and Korea in Transitions. Our team explores themes and questions that could broaden our perspective on Korean identity and social dynamics, both domestic and international. And this morning, we have 3 speakers presenting their work, followed by 2 discussants who will offer feedback and pose questions to deepen our conversation. Afterward, we'll take audience questions and conclude by briefly introducing the research from other team members that are not presented today. So that said, without further ado, let me introduce our first presenter. We have Professor Grace Kao from Yale University. The title of our talk is K-pop's place on the US Billboard Hot 100 chart. Professor Kao is a prominent sociologist specializing in the racial, ethnic, and immigrant differences in education outcomes, interracial relationships, and sociology of music, especially K-pop. She's currently director of the Center for Empirical Research on Stratification and Inequality at Yale University. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kao.
Good morning, everyone. I hope to keep you awake, and hopefully this will be a lot of fun. So I'm very pleased to join you this morning, and I'm going to talk about the Billboard Hot 100 charts and what K-pop's history on this chart tells us about the future of Koreanness in K-pop, and also give you some updates on the development of how companies are responding to wanting to be on this chart. And just a little bit more background, and I didn't get to put this on the slides. I'm actually also writing for the Korea Herald. So I have a column with other people, of course, and I'm writing about K-pop, mostly about the Hallyu and a little bit of sociology. And if you're interested, I also wrote about this topic in my column this week, which came out on Tuesday. So if you Google my name and Herald and Billboard, you'll get to see that article as well. So it sort of accompanies this. I asked Mina to hand out some stickers for a K-pop group that I am happy to support. So okay, let's start. So if you want a sticker, okay, great. So just a quick overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about the US Billboard Hot 100 charts. Talk a little bit about how it's changed over time, and give you a brief history of K-pop's presence on this chart and explain why the companies care so much about it. And I want to make an argument for the fact that it's really not just about revenue streams and money, but really about proving its presence in the Western market, but also it will make K-pop companies are all dealing with this right now, grapple with how much to change K-pop to satisfy what they believe is a global audience. Okay, and then maybe conclude with thinking about how this affects value and identity of K-pop and Korea overall. Okay, so just a quick brief history about popular music in the US before I jump to K-pop. So many sociologists, and I think social scientists overall, know about James Coleman. James Coleman wrote on many, many topics, but one of his earlier works is a book called The Adolescent Society, and really, I think, has been so influential in affecting sociologists and their take on the entire study of the sociology of adolescence. This is about the baby boomer generation. I always tell people that it takes pocket money for teenagers to support a pop music industry. And in the US, this came along with the development of a car culture, and also these charts, along with television shows that showed teenagers listening to music and explaining to the US audience like what music groups mattered. So 45 RPM records they were invented by RCA in 1949. I think those of us of a certain age, we all know what these things are, but of course my students don't know, have never seen one. And basically these 45s could hold a few minutes of audio per side. And upon its first release, they sold 1 million 45s. By 1958, Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and the Comic sold 3 million copies. And then you had the advent, I mean, jukeboxes were around already, but really they became more popular, and you could basically stick a coin in and choose a song, and then it would play the 45. Todd Stortz, who was a owner of a couple of radio stations in Omaha, Nebraska, he's credited with standardizing the top 40 radio format in 1951. But before that, there were other kinds of charts where Billboard might count the number of sheet music sales, or you can count radio plays and so forth. But it's really in the 50s where things begin to get a little bit standardized. Dick Clark, anyone familiar with Dick Clark? Yeah, okay. Top of the Pops. And so Dick Clark was first a DJ and then had a show in Philadelphia and West Philly, very close to where I lived. And, you know, he was later known as America's oldest teenager, but here was a hip-looking young man who hung out with a studio audience of teenagers. They weren't really teenagers, but they were sort of made to look like teenagers. And they would listen to the top hits of the era, but again, it showed the at-home audience that these were important acts to know, and then that this was, you know, what was on the minds of American teenagers. Okay. Billboard magazine itself, I thought this was really interesting. It actually began as a publication about billboards, hence the title of the magazine. By the early 1900s, they were covering stories about the entertainment industry, so not just actual billboards. And with the growth of the jukebox, 45s, and the radio, its focus moved to music. And the first list that they came up with in 1913 was last week's bestsellers. And again, this was the sheet music sales that I just talked about. By 1940, there's multiple lists of music sales, jukebox, song choices, radio play, etc. Okay, the Billboard Hot 100 charts begins in August 4th, 1958, or at least that's the date of the first chart. It combines a count of radio plays, sales, and jukebox plays. And the first song was Poor Little Fool by Ricky Nelson. And my show and tell is I have a copy of the 45 right here. I don't think this is original print, but here it is. And I won't play you the song. And what's interesting is in K-pop, I think a lot, or in pop music overall, people lament the fact that songs are getting shorter and shorter. But in the 50s, songs were about 2.5 minutes long, and the song was so. New Jeans, new songs are about the same length as well. Okay, I'll play this for you. So now it has actually many, many charts. I can't even find them all, at least 200 different kinds of charts. It includes charts for different genres, by country, by album, by radio, and so forth. And of course, it's counting different types of sales with the advent of digital, with social, YouTube, Spotify, and so forth. It's hard to count, and the permutations and the formulas used is something that K-pop fans and other fans, especially K-pop fans, tried to break the code and also manipulate these charts to the extent they can. Okay, and then for the remainder of this talk, I'm going to refer to the primary US singles chart, which is called the US Billboard Hot 100. That's the entire name. Okay, so I don't know exactly when Billboard first mentions the word K-pop, but some have argued that perhaps it was in 1999. I don't want to say that but let's say sometime in the late 90s, Billboard magazine itself is thinking, there is something in Korea that is coming out that we should pay attention to. By August 25th, 2011, there's a K-pop Hot 100, and Billboard has sort of gone back and forth about whether to have this particular chart. There's also Billboard magazine announced earlier this year that they were going to do a publication that's Billboard Korea, but it seems like it hasn't quite started, so I don't know what's happening with that. Okay, so let me give you a quick timeline, and some of you, this will be very familiar. Are there K-pop fans here? Favorite groups? Just shout out, what, Blackpink? Anyone else? Blackpink. Okay, come on, boy groups. BTS? Okay, cool. Stray Kids? Okay. Welcome stays? All right. So the first K-pop chart to actually chart was Nobody by the Wonder Girls. There is there's a group called the Kim Sisters, which I don't have time to talk about. You will see on the internet that people claim they had the first single. They did not. I've checked this thoroughly. So the first ones really are the Wonder Girls, and I'm going to play you a little clip. Wonder Girls is a JYP outfit. You can see that this is reminiscent of Motown, right? There's an English version of the song. If I didn't tell you this was K-pop, a lot of people wouldn't be able to identify it as K-pop because it sounds like an old Motown song. And of course, the second one is Psy's Gangnam Style. This reaches number 2. I'm not going to play you a clip because everyone knows what that sounds like. Okay, and then BTS has its first single called DNA in October 2017. 2018, Blackpink has its first single. And then September 2020, BTS reaches number 1 with Dynamite. And that's the first K-pop song to reach number 1 on the US charts. I'll show you a clip. There. Okay, so overall, as of last week, there's been 88 songs by K-pop act on the US Billboard Hot 100. A lot of fans argue that K-pop songs are disadvantaged because there's no radio play, essentially. So this is why they have to sort of figure out how Billboard counts things, and they'll watch the video when it's released, watch it many, many times, listen, repeat on Spotify, iTunes, and so forth to try to get their favorite group on the chart. And this is to offset what they believe is racism by the US music market. Okay, of the 88, 55 are by BTS or its members, and each of the 7 members have now charted by themselves. Of the 16 songs that have made it to the top 10, 14 are by BTS and 2 are by Psy. And I just wanted to show you the acts that have made it. So we go from the Wonder Girls, Psy, CL, BTS, members, of course, Blackpink, members, 3 members, New Jeans, everyone knows who New Jeans are, Taeyang of Big Bang. 50/50, really interesting because they're from a small company and they made it on because of TikTok. So someone found their music and sped it up at double speed and then started using it with lots of videos. And because of that, they were actually on the US Billboard Hot 100. The company kind of imploded because of this, because now there was something to fight over. We can talk about that later. But 50/50 is back, but most of the members are gone. So it's one old member, 3 new members, and the other 3 members have started their own group. Another story. Okay. Stray Kids, of course, Le Seraphim, Islet, Islet is a HYBE group. They're the first ones to have their debut single chart. Okay. That's cute. Okay, I'm going to test you later on the videos. So another way to count is how many weeks they've stayed on Billboard Hot 100, because what K-pop fans are really good at is they can get their acts on these charts for 1 week, because if you do a lot of intense buying and listening, you can get them on immediately, but the sustained part is actually very, very hard. So BTS, again, dominates, followed by Blackpink and so forth. Sorry about the number of songs I talked about already. So New Jeans have had 5 songs, but all pretty, low on the Hot 100 charts. And then I also tried to graph whether this is going up, and you'll see that this goes up with COVID, right? COVID was very good for K-pop and for BTS in terms of its presence in the Western market, but we'll see what happens when all the members return from the military, and as many of us know, there's a big scandal right now with Suga, so who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? The other thing that K-pop groups are really good at is selling physical albums, and I think this surprises a lot of people. So in the US, people are not really buying CDs anymore. They're just listening on Spotify and so forth. K-pop fans, however, still buy CDs. They buy many, many copies because you can try to get a photo card. And there could be photo cards that are randomly distributed. There can be different versions of albums that they can buy and so forth. So K-pop still dominates in terms of sales of physical albums. And in the interim that BTS has been in the military, other groups have overtaken them in terms of record sales. So the top selling, I believe Map of the Soul 7 is now the 5th best-selling album of all time, not the first. 17, Stray Kids and so forth have overtaken BTS. And of course, we know that in Korea, everybody wants to take credit for K-pop and for BTS and how important Korea is on the global map. I think all of us who follow Korean news have seen these kinds of quotes, but basically, people want to say that I've always been a fan of Top 40 radio or the Billboard charts, and it's so great that to see one of our own sort of hit these charts. But I want us to go back to the videos I just showed you, and hopefully you were paying attention a little bit. So have people heard the song Dynamite before I played it? Okay, great. Everyone's heard it, right? Earworm. Now, I don't know if you noticed what I noticed, but I'm Chinese American. I grew up in San Francisco. I'm familiar with what California is supposed to look like. And Dynamite to me is a very confusing video. Sort of gives me a headache. All right, I'll explain why. First of all, the song is not written by any member of BTS, which is very unusual for their songs. It's written by 2 Brits. So 2 Brits that are millennials. The lyrics are completely nonsensical. I know this is being recorded, so I should be careful, but they don't make any sense. It's not about anything, as far as I can tell. It's certainly not about Korea. It's shot on a set that's supposed to be LA. There's Randy's Donuts. The color, the sort of lighting is reminiscent of what late 70s are supposed to look like. But you have references from the 1990s. There was a sign that says CDs are sold. There's the word disco, but there's no disco in the 80s or 90s in LA. Like, it doesn't exist, right? So there's all kinds of confusing messages. I have a whole shtick about retro videos in K-pop. But so it's a really weird amalgam of what other people think of what America is like, but it's not made by any Americans. The song is not written by Americans, but it's completely in English. And there's also very little Korean content, really, right? Except that the members themselves are Korean. And this is true of much of K-pop right now. I think some people still imagine that K-pop is made by Koreans in Korea, and it's just not true. So songs now often have up to 10 different songwriters. It is global. Many current songwriters are in Sweden. They're actually very big in J-pop and K-pop. SM has developed a group called The Hub, where they're all foreign songwriters, and they've brought them to Korea to write. The producers, top liners, songwriters I know in Korea who are Korean, they're working with non-Koreans all the time. So it's actually, you'd have to dig to find a song that's actually written, produced, and made in Korea in K-pop. It's quite hard. So, I mean, that's another discussion, but related to this. So this, to me, is not particularly, it's part of the Hallyu, but what do we learn from Korea, from the video? Not sure. Same with 50/50. Can't tell what that is either. Wonder Girls, it's Motown, sort of, right? So the other thing that the companies have done, and Hive in particular, is they'll release songs on midnight on Thursdays. So Billboard starts counting Friday. So the idea is that the timing is all set up for the US charts, not the Korean charts. There's pressure now to have more English or English-only songs. Hive has debuted a new girl group called Cat's Eye, which were trained in LA, part of an audition show. Geffen Records is a partner, and they've worked with BTS's lead choreographer. One member is Korean American. There's a lot of these groups coming. There's something called Dear Alice, which is a British group, 5 non-Korean, non-East Asian guys, but they have funding from SM. So this is one way to localize things, and we can talk about to what extent does this help or hurt the Hallyu, or what is the Hallyu? So is K-pop still Korean? Like I said, it's written by people all over the world. It's produced by folks in different places. K-pop groups now, more often than not, have one non-Korean member. Sometimes it's a Korean Australian, Korean Canadian, but now there's more and more other Asians, and of course, other folks are coming. And then what is K-pop? So Lisa of Blackpink, who is Thai, her new song is filmed in Bangkok. It's very clearly Thailand. The cast, the music video director, the writers are not, no one is Korean. But this is still being pushed as K-pop. So is that K-pop? And I don't have an answer for all of you. It's just like, it's K-pop, it's actually very complicated now, what is K-pop? But everyone identifies this as K-pop. And then yesterday, I actually visited the World K-pop Center, which is very interesting. But they just hosted a reality audition show called Click the Star in Peru. And so they've debuted an all-Peruvian girl group called Bling One. So, and they advertise themselves as K-pop. They're not Korean, they're trying to learn a little bit of Korean, but again, is this K-pop? And I just want to put, this idea forward to all of you, is the association between K-pop and Korea and the Hallyu dissipating as K-pop becomes more popular? It seems like some of these companies are just branding it as a way of making music, and we can sell it or show anyone in any country how it's produced. But again, what is it that makes it Korean or keeps it Korean? So the latest I wanted to share with you is a song by the Stray Kids that just came out. And this features cameos by Hugh Jackman as Wolverine and Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. And the background sets are in New York City. And the song is primarily in Korean and English with reggaeton and other Latin influences.
What? No.
Okay, so I'll end here. Basically, we don't know what's happening. K-pop companies are trying different things because they want to make sure they stay relevant, and they're trying to sell themselves, of course. And I want to bring out the question of if K-pop becomes very, very successful, to what extent does that help or hurt the Korean wave? And I will leave these 2 QR codes up if you're curious about my bio. That's on the left. But if you want an intro to K-pop playlist, it's a 40-song playlist. Feel free to use the QR code. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, our next speaker is Professor Leora Safarti. She's a professor in the Department of East Asian Studies at Tel Aviv University. She specializes in anthropology and folklore, focusing on religion, society, culture, and media in South Korea. Her research includes shamanic healing rituals and performativity in mass demonstrations, utilizing urban ethnography and digital humanities tools. She's currently serving as a chair of the Korean Religion Unit of the American Academy of Religion. Very important job for our field. Professor Farty presents her paper titled The Cosmopolitan Vernacular, Korean Shaman Mudang in the Global Spirituality Market. Please join me welcoming Professor Farty.
So, hello everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here and speak about Korean shamanism in Korea. That would be a good place. Maybe I can say Busok instead. And if you haven't seen a Korean shamanic ritual, I would say that you could go on Monday to Namsak Hanol. It's on Namsan Mountain. There is a Kukak Center, and there will be a shaman ritual from 3:30 to 6:30. It's open to the public. It will be a Hanyankut ritual, like performance, but the shamans will be doing ritual for, blessing, general blessing. And if you haven't seen, please go. It would be beautiful. So in my work, I study Korean shamans, Korean shamanism, and different aspects. But today we'll talk about a new, or maybe new phenomenon in the last maybe 15 years of cosmopolitan shamans. And that was not my original research, but it became so big that that's what I'm doing recently. The main point of my talk will discuss cosmopolitanism as a concept. Is cosmopolitanism related only to religions that have traveled the world, like Christianity or Buddhism? I'll talk about that a little bit. I'll talk about the vernacular. What is a vernacular religion? And how Busok traveled globally in many ways. I'll talk about the media a little bit. We have to remember that not all Mudangs are cosmopolitans, and not all of them work with foreigners. So I have to say that before I start talking about the ones that are. The 4 ethnographic case studies that I will present today are Budang that are cosmopolitan in the way I analyze it. And the practitioners themselves explain in my interviews and discussion that the spirits can communicate beyond spoken word. So we'll see that not all the cosmopolitan Mudang can communicate in languages that are not Korean. And they still work with foreigners. And they also say that their clients' ancestral spirit don't necessarily have to be Korean. And the gods don't necessarily have to be Korean, which is quite interesting. I'll talk about media depiction as the vehicle that allows this expansion into the global world. Maybe it's part of Hallyu, like Grace mentioned. It goes into shamanism. Some people say K-shamanism now, about the shamans in the dramas. I'll discuss that a little bit. And then I'll conclude by trying to say that the vernacular is a very flexible system of culture, and it can allow this global intersection very easily. And Mudang recreate their music practices everywhere, in Korea too. It will not be the topic of my discussion today, but in Korea we see all kinds of influences, including K-pop being played in rituals, by the way. I've seen that too. So this flexibility allows also extending globally. And that's part of this hyper-modern condition that we're all discussing as part of the contemporary Korean studies. And I think that's how it comes into this conference. Well, a lot of things to discuss in these 20 minutes left, so let's begin with discussing the terms. So when we talk about cosmopolitans, many people think about Christianity and Buddhism as cosmopolitan religions in pre-modern time, right? People traveled, people learned languages, translated, and these have been discussed as cosmopolitan religions. And usually shamanism and household rituals, not just in Korea, everywhere, were discussed as very local tradition. That's why we use the word vernacular. The word vernacular discusses things that are flexible, lived traditions done in a local way, word of mouth transmission. All this goes with shamanism and household ritual in Korea too, in pre-modern time, not necessarily in Seoul today. So when I come to Seoul, I think Seoul is not a local tradition hub. Anyway, you have here people from North Korea, people from the very south, and everybody's working in the Korean shaman scene. And they influence each other in Korea. So for me, this vernacularization began with the urbanization, before globalization. So in shamanism, when all the shamans came to Seoul, so now you can see a shaman that says, I'm doing Hanyankut, but she's playing music, or the musicians are Hangedokut musicians. In the past, it wasn't that, that way. So when they travel abroad or when the foreigners come, they already come into something that has globalized. And I think the definition of vernacular religion has changed in the past 20 years, not just in Korea. Everywhere, vernacular religions are more fusion. And I often hear in Korea the term fusion mudang as a derogatory term. Many scholars, especially Min Seok-hak scholars, they study folklore, think it's very bad because this fusion is kind of degrading or destroying the heritage. On the other hand, I will try to show that this urbanization, globalization, cosmopolitization, whatever we want to call it, has created a lived tradition that is really lived. So if vernacular is a lived tradition, then it has to be fusion. It has to get all these influences. It can't stay a typically Korean local tradition, then it will not live. And then it will not be vernacular, right? So that's a paradox, because vernacular has to be a lived tradition. And lived tradition have to be alive. Alive meaning changing, incorporating, adapting new trends, including foreigners, which are, when I came first to Korea, 2005, I was walking the street, people came and touched my hair and my eyes, and it was like a big thing, even in Seoul. It wasn't that common to see many, many foreigners, especially children, for example. My children were like a big attraction. Now I walk in Seoul, there's foreigners everywhere, right? So why wouldn't there be foreigners in the shamanic scene, in the spiritual, what I call the global spiritual market? And Busoke, in fact, I think has a lot to contribute because it's really a lived tradition. In many places, we talk about neo-shamanism, neo-paganism. For example, in Europe, in UK, it's very big now. But there are traditions that went down because of Christianity. Now they're coming up again as the new age. In Korea, it's very unique. It's not a new age. So it's very vernacular, but it's very cosmopolitan. It's really a unique situation, which we don't see as much, especially not in Europe, United States. You see it more in South America. You can see it more in China, Singapore, Taiwan, places where the tradition really lived in the local community, and then it's being globalized. So we see it in Asia a lot, and that's a big contribution to religious development, I think, in our kind of this discussion of global or comparative, contemporary global religion research. So how do we use the term cosmopolitanism where some of the the shamans, especially the first one I'll introduce, don't even speak other languages. And on the other hand, many Koreans travel abroad, but are these people who travel a lot for business and other reasons cosmopolitan? So I take a theory by Ulf Hanners, he's a sociologist of the complex societies of late 20th and 21st century, and he discusses cosmopolitanism as a perspective, and not in geographical terms. So it's very interesting. If you're interested, you can look up his reference. He's saying many people travel the world a lot in terms of geography, but they're not cosmopolitans. So, well, I'll say something about some of my friends in Seoul who are from Western countries. but for example, stay very close to their, let's say, culinary tradition, right? If I'm Western, but I don't like Korean food, not me, I love Korean food. Or if I'm Korean living in Israel, and it's very difficult for me, I'm from Israel, because there are no Korean stores, and I cannot get my food. Ulf Hanner said that people who travel and stick very strongly with their traditions are travelers and not cosmopolitans. He talks a lot about business people who travel but take their stuff with them, even the food. And it's very common by my country people also to take food with them when they travel, right? So for Ulf Hanner, they won't be cosmopolitan. They can travel a lot. But if I'm a Korean shaman, speaking only Korean and living only in Korea, but I'm so interested in other places, and I accept foreigners to my practice, in this definition, they will be cosmopolitans, because it's about perspective, not about moving in place, in spaces. And we can move or not move. Well, of course, Korean shaman moves a lot. Now everybody travels. So that cannot be the definition, travelers. Travelers are not necessarily cosmopolitan. Even expat, people who live in other countries, even diaspora people, would not be cosmopolitan necessarily in this definition. If they live in their own communities, in the new place, their children barely speak the new languages, go to all kind of their school or international school, they won't be cosmopolitans in this definition. That was very helpful for me to learn this kind of theory. And I think it's very true because traveling is not that big an issue now. I can travel. Everybody can travel. But do we really open up our minds to other perspectives? Interestingly, these carriers of ancient traditions, as Mudang were described in the past, these people that are seemingly, and sometimes also as a stigma, discussed as old-timers, superstitious, Mishin, Handa, Saram. But they are the cosmopolitans now. Not all of them, but many that we wouldn't think from very uneducated backgrounds, et cetera, are very open-minded, I find in my analysis and interviews. So to sum this up, I think that vernacular and Korean shaman fit very well into this cosmopolitan perspective. As an idea, I think that even because shaman discuss other places, mythical places, in their stories, in their song, they live in different realities anyway, in their perspective. And therefore, it's not that difficult to live in another country or to travel to another country to work with foreigners. It's kind of in their state of mind. Even when they lived in villages, I think, but I cannot, of course, interview a shaman from 200 years ago. But it seems to me, when I try to think about these women in the villages, that they had a little bit broader perspective of what the world can be, because they had all these mythical travels to foreign mystical places. So what media did to this kind of setup is introduce the world into shamanism and introduce Busok also to Korean audiences in a different manner. So I won't go deeply into all of this. This is just a list of samples of Iodo by Kim Ki-young, masterpiece film. If you've seen it, if you don't, please watch. 1977, the shaman, the Mudang, is a very bad person. She does very strange things, to say the least. Sexuality is emphasized in her character in a bad way for 1977. I don't want to give you teasers because it's kind of a thriller or a horror, whatever, psychological film. But she is the main character, and actually she is the problem. And she creates problems for modernization and commercialization of the place where she lives. And she lives in a very, very remote, kind of half-existing island. That's Iodo. So that's the perspective of the shaman as something that represents backwardness, terrible things. You know, you don't want to meet that person. Now, the shamans I meet are very nice usually, and they're not scary. I'll jump to the 2024 Exhuma. I don't know if I want to meet that shaman too. I don't know if, have you seen that? Pamyo, it's a new film that came out now. Protagonist is a shaman. She's very pretty and nice, which the woman in Iodo is older. But it's very scary too. I just discussed that in the past week that I've been here with several Mudang and asked them what they think about her. And they tell me, well, who thinks that films are reality anyway? So for their perspective, they don't really like the way they are depicted. But sometimes they say even bad publicity is good publicity. They say that, you know, well, so many people know, and people don't really believe that Mudang do this kind of thing. I won't give you teaser about that. Pamyo, just watch that. But, there's even 500-year-old Japanese generals there, spirits. So just mention that. Very mythical. So if we go in between 2009, Chonnam Posal, very beautiful young girl. She has a very nice shaman saloon or divination hall in Cheongdam. So she's fancy, she's in Gangnam, she's rich, and she's very cute. We kind of fall in love with her. She's a very nice character. Man on Edge is something else. He's a gangster, but again, very pleasing, not very scary, etc. The Wailing is also a horror film. So I think it goes by genres. I won't have time to discuss that. Anyway, we see the increasing main protagonist, Mudang, who are really effective. Something that strikes me in these movies, that the Mudang are very effective. They can achieve something in the real world, which is kind of surprising because I skipped the list of the films from the 80s and 90s where the Mudangs were they were joking about the Mudangs. They were always fake. They never managed to do anything. They never solved anything. They were just faking in the 80s and 90s. And they were usually not main characters. But here they're main characters. And they're effective, even if they're scary. Actually, the one in Iodo is also effective. Like, what she's doing happens, or what she divines happens. So that's kind of interesting duality there. Now we go to K-drama. That's a different world. K-drama usage of footage of Kut ritual is going up amazingly. So when I teach a class in Israel, and I suddenly show a brief video that I took in a ritual, in an actual ritual, it's not surprising for them. They all watched it in the Glory and everywhere. So even, these are dramas where the main character is the Mudang. But for example, The Glory was very popular on Netflix globally, and there is a huge Kut ritual, a bit scary too, but it's horror, but it's effective, and the Mudang is effective again. They don't joke about her. She's scary, she knows what she's doing, she sees the spirit. But in these three dramas that I brought, it's also interesting. The first one, many of them are young and handsome and pretty. For example, here you can see in the middle, the last one, the Cafe Minangdang. He's a fake Mudang, actually. He's not true. But he's handsome, and people believe he's not fake. And he has a bunch of admirers that shout and want him to touch him. He's a celebrity. He's like BTS, right? So that's something else. That's something that I don't think I've seen before in drama, definitely not in real life, and not in films. So the dramas take it even a further notch into making these musokin into celebrities. And they're also very lovable, even him that is a fake. And he's also effective by being fake, which is kind of funny. So we don't hate him. We're not afraid of him. Actually, we think, we would like to harness such a person when we have a problem. He's a detective. So that's how media came into this. And then foreigners know it, foreigners seek it, local people seek it, younger people seek it. And for me, that's the lived tradition, right? That's the vernacular. And actually, I don't see the shamans themselves opposing it. They really like it. So I have in my article 4 case studies. I'll just go briefly over them because there's no time to tell about a person's life story in a few minutes. But the first Mudang is Ihegyong, sitting in the middle. And actually, the reason I'm using the word Mudang, for so many years I've been using the word Manshin or Posalim, that's the way they treat themselves. Now the Mudang, they call themselves Mudang because of the media. Because in the media it said, they say Mudang, and it's not a bad word anymore. It was very surprising. Like in the past 5 years, big revolution with the terms Mudang or Manshin. In the past, to say Mudang was bad, you could say Manshin, it was better. But all the Mudang now, they call themselves Mudang everywhere, in their social media, in their web pages. So that's kind of how media comes back into Busok effect. So Ihegyeon is a very famous Mudang. She studied with Kim Hung-hwa. Kim Hung-hwa is like the biggest Korean cosmopolitan shaman that I don't discuss in this article. And she featured in 2 very important documentaries about Busok. In her case, when she featured in the documentaries that were showed in regular cinemas, they were not like secret documentaries. People bought tickets and watched them. They were one of the most successful documentaries of their times, and she got a boost of clientele. So that was her high point of career. But she works also on Facebook, on Twitter. Whenever something started, she was there. She was on Twitter, then Koreans didn't use Twitter as much, and she left it, and she's always connecting with people. She doesn't speak foreign languages. She travels extensively to perform rituals on stages abroad, museums, universities, etc. She also travels to heal people abroad. So she has several Shintal, like the spirit daughters that she trained that live in Europe and America, and they connect her to their local clients. So in this way, she's very cosmopolitan, and she doesn't speak foreign languages. And she said, you know, when Korean people pray to Jesus, Yesunim, they don't speak in a language that he would understand, right? But they don't think, that's how she explained it to me when I asked her how she communicates with these German ancestors and these American ancestors. And she said, you know, like people in Korea pray to Jesus and they think he can understand them. That's the way I can understand the other spirits. That was really interesting for me, how she's, you know, discussing her cosmopolitanism very easily. She doesn't feel bad about it. Then when I started looking, I mean, before I did this research, I was working only with really local Korean shamans, like Lee Hae-kyung. With her, I've been working for 20 years. But then I started looking for the people who work with foreigners. So Pang Geun-mi is very famous. She was a model, an actress, something. So she's considered celebrity. And that's why they always invite her to talk shows and all kind of places where they want to display shaman. But she speaks English, and her son studied in Canada. So she accepts foreigners who live in, well, she's not in Seoul, she's in Ilsan, but anyway, they travel. And she accepts the foreigners who want divination, and she can do it in English herself. Actually, when I came to interview her first, she has a manager, and the managers told me how much it would cost to get a divination. He was sure I'm coming to get a divination, you know, by the even beginning in the email correspondence. She has a lot of foreign clientele. And she also promotes it. For example, here we see poster that she, you know, posted on all kind of foreigners' websites in Seoul, in Incheon, Ilsan, wherever, that she was doing this kind of meeting with her and getting to know her. And then after that, people start coming to her for consultation. She's very interesting. Also, her pantheon that you see behind in the painting, she considers herself very feminist. She has many spirits who are in their female version, which does exist in Korean tradition, but she kind of accentuates it because she says, I'm a feminist. So being a cosmopolitan is not only about working with foreigners, it's also about how she views her role as a Mudang person. She also opened a cafe. So I thought about Minamdang Cafe, in the fake shaman in the drama. He has a cafe, and in the back he has a divination room. So she also opened a cafe, kind of using the place, the coffee shop and divination place. And she appears in journals and lifestyle magazines and things like that. She's very interesting, and she works with foreigners in Korea. So we're kind of moving from the very Korean cosmopolitan to the Korean who lives in Korea but works with foreigners. And now we're moving outside Korea. So the first Westerner to be initiated into Korean shamanism as a fully fledged Mudang is Andrea Kalf. She's German. She featured in a lot of media projects. She also features in the movie Manshin about Kim Kum-hwa, her spirit mother. Here she's in her office in Germany, preparing for a ritual with the bells and everything. She writes a lot about in Facebook. She has clientele from all over the world, America, South America. They come to her to Germany. When Kim Kum-hwa was alive, she would travel every year to Andrea's place and conduct like a few days of rituals for all these foreign clients. Sometimes the clients travel to Korea with Andrea to perform. And she talks very freely about how, and she doesn't speak Korean, a word, not a word. So that's the other side of, you know, the thing. She's a Mudang, she divines, and again, she would tell you, you know, I can communicate with Korean gods, no problem. You know, it's beyond languages. And Korean ancestors of her Shinamoni, which is kind of very interesting. So yeah, she writes a lot on Facebook. If you go to Andrea Kal Facebook, open to the public, she writes a lot of kind of poetic explanation about her travels and all that. And the last one is Jenny, who calls herself Mudang Jen in her social media. She's a New York-born Korean-American who speaks Korean. So, everything is getting confused. We can't really put the line. I'm emphasizing because that's how they talk about it. Because she, for example, said, I can speak Korean. I can learn from Korean people. I can travel to Korea and buy things in the stores. I don't need this mediator and translator. So she sees it as an advantage, but she's born in America, and most of her clients are not Korean. So she works a lot with social media and performances in New York, all kind of artistic performances. But she sees herself as a promoter of Korean culture, so she has all these posts where she explains the offerings and everything's in English. I mean, I don't think she does even divination in Korean, maybe for older Korean clients. So these are the 4 people that I focus on in this research, and I'll come to my conclusion. And that's Manshin, I had to put that. Because actually Kim Kung-hwa is the most cosmopolitan Manshin, but I didn't do ethnographic research, close ethnographic research with her. So I don't allow myself to write about her in this way, but she's the first person who traveled abroad, initiated the people again. She didn't speak Korean. It didn't stop her from doing all this cosmopolitan work that she did, and she passed away a few years ago. So I wanted to show in this talk that Mudang work in the global spiritual market, some of them in Korea, some of them abroad. Cosmopolitan Mudang combine shamanic practices from other places, like Korean Mudang, right? These people try not to use tarot, for example, but in Korea some people do use tarot card, for example. So they try, the European ones and the American Mudang that I talk to always feel very connected to Korean shamanic tradition. When you go to their home popdang, it looks like a Korean shrine for the gods. So they are really emphasizing their connection to Korea, but they conduct ritual over the screen. Again, Mudang in Korea also conduct rituals over screen, especially in Corona period. They would, do the ritual in the shrine and broadcast it to clients who wouldn't come. And that has become kind of a normal practice, but these cosmopolitan people have been doing it for like 10 years. So I think Musuk is a living tradition. It's very relevant to urban people, and its depiction in the media, even if it's kind of twisted and exaggerated, has created this buzz about it. So I don't think it's dying. When I started doing this research, I thought, I'll be documenting the last Manshin that still practice. Oh no, it's just going up, I think, and the media and globalization and their openness to new ideas really helps them. And they're not that scary. So if you see Pamyo, don't be so afraid of Manshin. And of course, we're in a hyper-modern society, and Korea is a hyper-modern society, so I think we should be fine with that, I hope. Thank you.
Okay, as you come to the final presentation of our session, I'm excited to introduce our last speaker, Professor Melrose Wang from Hiram College, which is located in the beautiful state of Ohio, where I used to live. I don't recognize the state. She's specializing in modern East Asian social, cultural, and gender history. Her research explores themes such as shamanism, political disobedience, and religious rituals utilized for the healing of mass trauma. Her topic today is the ethics of grief, reflections on recent youth deaths in South Korea. Please welcome Professor Wang.
Thank you so much. I do have to make a couple of thank you acknowledgments because this is not my area of specialization, and so I owe great debt and gratitude to a few people who made this new foray for me possible. So it was made possible by a friendship with Professor Robert Bo Jacobs at Hiroshima City University. I was actually there in the spring researching hibakusha in Japan, still living in the Kansai region. And then he put me in touch with Professor Scott Knowles at KAIST University, and that's how I came on to working with the 416 Institute for Democratic Citizenship in their 10th year annual 10th year commemoration that just happened in April. I'm imagining that most of you have probably, or many of you have gone through the Ansan 416 Institute? Has anybody been there in this room? There have been a few. They're so prolific in the research, and they're so generous with the research that they have produced. And so I'm imagining that many of us have some familiarity with it. So I'm looking at two cases. One, the cases are probably familiar to all of us because it made international headlines. So the case that happened with the Seoul tragedy back in April 16, 2004, where a field trip for high school students at Taiwan High School was supposed to sail from Ansan or Incheon area to Jeju. And then it's saying just north of the Pyeongpong-do, and 476 people were on board, 304 people died, and 250 of them were from Taiwan High School. And then the second incident that I'm looking at in comparison is the Itaewon tragedy that happened, where a lot of people call it the crowd crush tragedy. That is a very questionable term. That happened in October 29th of 2022. Following Halloween festivities, 159 people were killed, 196 people were injured, 27 of the people that were killed were foreigners. To see if I can, as a historian, contemporary historian, can make some sense of these two events. The Seoul tragedy is the largest civilian accident tragedy that has happened in the country since the Sangpung department store tragedy that happened in 1995. And then since that happened 10 years ago, the Itaewon tragedy was the second most biggest mass death that had happened during peacetime. So to understand this from a historian's perspective, I'm looking at a few things. So I'm using the idea of necropolitics that was really established by Achille Mbembe, who explores the concept of necropolitics to describe contemporary state-sponsored deaths and social engineering campaigns to endanger and possibly extinguish certain populations of people. Actually, more relevant to what I'm thinking about with these cases is Marina Gerzinik's argument, where she picks up on Mbembe's argument by demonstrating global capitalist policies that essentially produce state surplus value from death. And so thinking about these ideas, I wonder if we can think about how the dead and the spared are remembered or forgotten, revealing, at least for me, a kind of neoliberal and the way I think of it is more a neo-colonial death world. And thinking about Scott Knowles' concept here. This was in his Ansan 10th year commemoration presentation, where he thinks about slow disaster. So he comes out with a team of graduate students in a slow disaster lab, and he notices how historical processes make disasters possible. And by thinking about those things, I'm presenting three possible causes. So these are historically longitudinal causes. And the first one is a Cold War palimpsest. So, the first one is the negative eugenics campaign, which ties me back to my old wheelhouse of Japanese colonial period. The second one is a Cold War palimpsest, and the third one is more contemporary considerations of hygienics of grief. These all inhabit spatial time compressions of Korea for about the past 100 years or so. And then I think about two possible outcomes from these tragedies. And, they are grief-induced outcomes, and then how some people, not all, but some people become ungrievable, where they're not populations that should be considered grievable. So thinking about negative eugenics, I'm sure if those of you who worked on colonial history or late 18th or 19th century history know about eugenics. Alison Bashford and Philippa Levine have come out with this very useful handbook on world history, comparing histories of eugenics. And they say that eugenics always has an evaluative logic at its core. Some human life was of more value to the state, the nation, the race, future generations than other human life. And thus it advocates its advocates sought to implement those practices differentially. And so with the negative eugenics campaign in South Korea, I think about a few things. First, we always hear about South Korea having the lowest birth rate in the world. People also panic about undocumented migrant workers taking their jobs, destabilizing the country. These phenomena happening concurrently, they remind me of historical conditions that sprouted social engineering techniques employed from what I've studied under the Japanese Empire, where military casualties and outmigration pushed eugenicists to consider new ways of boosting healthy, bountiful labor populations, and at the same time reducing undesirable ones. Today, popular television programs, as we know, follow the quotidian lives of mixed-race couples in the state's celebration of new Korean families, while the media underplays mounting exploitation of foreign laborers. The Seoul and Itaewon tragedies should remind us of how precious all populations are, and civil society here should be especially outraged that the state failed to protect their future, the young generation. But when the public portrays Itaewon youth, specifically them, as poorly raised or hence less grievable, it becomes apparent that their valuation is based on contrived distinctions, reminiscent of the social ethical expressions that have enabled negative eugenics campaigns to eradicate undesirable populations in the past. The scars of our social injustices have a long-term effect that some people, many scholars around the world are calling epigenetic trauma that can reverberate across generations. These tragedies occurred under the watch of two similar presidents. I think of them as similar, and I think there have been recently kind of disturbing similarities that have been made between these two presidents, President Park Geun-hye and Yoon Suk-yeol, our current president. This current phase, I think of as a longue durée of the Cold War that would extend from 1948 essentially to the present. Both conservative governments were beefing up their anti-North Korean strategies, compromising domestic safety needs. So a year before Seoul, Park initiated a joint THAAD system with the United States. She was accused of lining the pockets of her inner circle by allowing a substandard ferry ship and its mismanaging team to remain in service, arguably causing the Ansan high school mass death. Survivors of the Namyeong ferry disaster in 1970 reported that Seoul reminded them of the same situation where Park's father, Park Chung-hee, oversaw an unregulated, overloaded ferry at the time. And it's actually quite haunting, I guess. That's a kind of understatement, but how similar the policies were between the two of them and their outcomes. Similar issues of overloaded ferry, unregulated policies on a ship that should have been retired, delayed emergency response team. The Japanese coastal services picked up on both of those incidences much prior to the Korean, the Naval Corps coming in. And so these mass deaths have reminded a lot of those people from the 1970s and their bereaved families of that incident that had continued to be unresolved. On the evening of the Itaewon tragedy, Yoon had redirected and concentrated police and security forces, and many of you probably know the story because it was all over the news, away from Itaewon to his office for his own security reasons, and then delayed emergency task forces to arrive on scene by up to 4 hours. And that led to a much larger mass death that could have been avoided. So here is Yoon learning from the impeached President Park's situation, and he places a gag order on the media and removes temporary memorial markers from Itaewon, and then also issues a Seoul metropolitan government to give up their space in Gwanghwamun for their protests. So these things, they demand further investigation. People are demanding fair compensation. Right-wing groups disrupted these rallies, and they're yelling obscenities, describing the bereaved families and other survivors as freeloaders. Some of them actually were in Ansan. I heard a lot of people being called 빨갱이, like communists, and these types of lambasting comments. So hygienics of grief, so this is the kind of crux of the paper that I'm working on. As a Korean shamanism historian, I've examined indigenous ritual healing process for people who survived Japanese colonialism and Cold War genocides. And I once assumed that the curative potential of gutang, as Professor Sephardi had so eloquently elucidated, these are necessary types of piacular rites, and that they help survivors of neoliberal mass deaths in that the living and the death from the time of death could convene between their ghosts and detail and lament how they died. Survivors could express their torment and their longing, and the relationship with the dead could continue as survivors promised their reunion at the next future coup. But after asking survivors, multiple survivors of the Seoul and the Itaewon tragedies, about what kinds of healing processes they go through, ritual healing processes, I was repeatedly told that they were unaware of such rituals being available for them. Not to say that that's true, but that seems to be very present in a lot of these survivors' minds. Immediately after the Seoul disaster happened, as you can see in this slide here on the right side, there were Catholic services held. This one is actually at the 10th year commemoration in Gwanghwamun Plaza. On the left side is the shamanic ritual that happened in the weeks just following the Itaewon disaster. And also Buddhist monks gathered on the 49th day after Itaewon to pray for the dead to ascend into heaven. So there were a number of different types of rituals that had happened, but in the minds specifically of the Seoul, because it's already been 10 years gone now, they seem to not really be thinking about this or perhaps avoiding it. They seem especially adamant about not participating in shamanic rituals, which I thought was quite interesting. This could be their wish to disassociate themselves from any form of corruption, because I'm thinking 2 years before the Seoul disaster, as you guys remember, President Park Geun-hye was found to have had a lifelong confidant in a shamanistic prophet who embezzled millions of public dollars and helped her to make political decisions. That rumor then was investigated. When they found out information about this, that was kind of like the final nail in the coffin that helped to get that president ousted from office. Local politics and indigenous culture around ghosts and ansan might help us better understand why bereaving families might avoid shamanistic rituals for their dead. Bereaving parents fought a nasty battle with the Taiwan high school administrators and with other parents in their request to dedicate the victim classrooms as permanent memorial rooms in the school. So if you read through the oral testimonies by the parents, you hear some of this, the language that was spoken between the parents at the school. Some parents rejected this proposal, fearing that bereaved parents mourning on campus was encouraging ghosts of those fallen children to haunt the school and the surviving children. The more public-facing reason was that having a permanent memorial would compromise the educational interests of existing students, saying they need these classrooms, it's very disruptive to the curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. Bereaved parents responded that their dead children were still members of Taiwan High School, even though they were dead, and that they had the rights for their remains to be maintained at the school. They argued that if their classrooms disappeared, their children would have nowhere else to go. These are dead children, right? But the majority rejection of bereaved parents was also so pervasive that the school principal at the time, Chu Kyo-yang, also he asked the bereaved families and their mourning visitors to stop visiting the school altogether. So as a result, most of the physical objects of the original classroom were carefully disassembled, moved off-site, and then reassembled at what is now the new 416 Institute. And it's made to appear exactly as it did at the time that the disaster happened. And today, student groups visit the museum classrooms to sit with the ghosts of their fallen senior classmates as the parents of those lost children talk about the conditions of their death, their memorials, their hopes, the dreams that their children had, etc. So the superstitious scandal aside that happened with Park Geun-hye, the timing, in my mind, might just not be right for some of these bereaved associations to request something like a grand ritual to happen for their children's ghosts. If we look at the processes involved in other previous mass deaths, we can see that they had several decades of post-traumatic underground mobilizations, and they acquired so much scholarly and grassroots political support from the zeal of the late 1980s Minjung movement that they managed to appeal to the United Nations and launch their own Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So it was like this kind of tightly wound issue that was suddenly released in the post-democratic era of the late 1980s. And so those things really helped to kind of jumpstart that appeal to the UN and then launch their own Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. Seoul and Itaewon, by contrast, had just a few hundred casualties. I'm not saying they're not important, but by scale, we're thinking about the difference. Whether or not Seoul and Itaewon will ever reach those earlier levels of exposure or have mass cemeteries, which is something that is still a very hot debate right now, and the rituals that come with that kind of massive grave relocation, all of those things still remain to be seen. So the Seoul-induced associations seem to be displacing or moving away from typically spiritually centered bereaving processes, placing their focus on politically actionable matters. And this, Professor, I thank you for the conversation that we had to think through this, like safety, remembrance, and resolution. So rather than mudding their mission with things like shamans and exorcisms, these bereaved associations, they encourage their members to engage in activities that are more akin to Western treatments, such as talk therapy, drug prescriptions, art therapy, rest and relaxation activities, as this particular hall is meant for, and other types of volunteer work. But still, parents and their surviving children continue to suffer from such extreme trauma that they're losing things like their vision, and these are the things that they've told me. They're losing their vision, their teeth, their hair, their knees, their hands, their arms, and their backs are falling apart, requiring more acute medical attention just as the relief packages have run out. So they ran out as of the 10th year, this past spring. Most are struggling to sleep, to eat, to work, or to support relationships. Many, especially husbands, it seems, I've been told, have become alcoholics. They ideate suicide. And at the time that I was there in late April, a couple of them had just committed suicide. So the Seoul disaster community and subsequently Itaewon are engaging in old and new forms of political acts that inadvertently render spiritual reunions. So this recent 10th year anniversary showcased a robust program with an evening music concert, nationally broadcast memorial service, a walking tour of Tangwon High School, and multiple 416 Institute events throughout the day. Just as the Gwangju and Jeju families have done for one another, they continue to offer advice to the Seoul Association, and in turn, the Seoul families offer their support and advice to Itaewon's newest bereaving families. The Seoul Association is gradually drifting towards more public forms of grieving, where they engage in highly orchestrated sanitary ritual community action and performance. And so like through stifled tears, the themes, the characterizations, the public displays of intimacy between the dead kin and the surviving families, they seem to be coalescing and cohering with one another through these ways. Intimate and highly visible political events induce a collective consciousness and a deep memory. So their grieving processes remain emotionally charged as they occur in these safe modern spaces. So you see this 416 Seoul and Jeju Memorial Hall. This is just down the street from the Jeju 4-3 Peace Park. It's staffed by progressively minded volunteers who grieve as they erect monthly birthday wall celebrations for Seoul victims. The committee chairperson, Mr. Shin, he was arrested and then he was released without charge. But he solicits businesses in the vicinity to help him add and to maintain these pretty display tables in their shops, in their restaurants, kind of reminding patrons in the area to not forget Seoul. Content creators of all ages, they bear witness and dive into their survivors' guilt as they post newsletters and blogs. They run book tours on their memoirs and novels. So these authors here were doing their book tours at the time that I was there. Novice singers joined the 416 community choir, voicing their grief through harmonies. Archivists handle heavy bags of ocean mud as if they contain their dead children's corpses. So here on the left side, you see Director Lee's archive of ocean mud. It's almost like they're like kind of massaging the body bags of their children without having those corpses in their hands. Volunteers exchange small and heavy conversation as they spend hours crafting hundreds of yellow ribbon keychains. Tangwon tour guide points at a fish jumping out of a pond, saying that her late son has just surfaced to greet us. These are all kind of, for me, they're examples of this kind of processing their mourning, right? A performance artist creates a video montage with voiceovers of bereaved mothers meditating on their lost children. So there are all of these things. But moving forward, though, I want to think about how some become ungrievable. When you think about Itaewon by contrast, which lives are not worth grieving? That's the question. In the public eye, victims are gauged on an extrajudicial spectrum that ranges from innocent to guilty, or martyr, if you want to think about it in a religious sense, martyr to apostate, largely due to the neighborhood of ill repute in which Itaewon's mass death happened. The youth associated with this tragedy have been pushed to the guilty end of that ethical spectrum. Many were in grade school when they watched the Seoul ferry drown on their phones, right? They came of age under isolation of the COVID pandemic. Then as soon as the social distance regulation was lifted, rather than following the Korean Disease Control Prevention Agency advice to maintain caution and stay put, they took this first opportunity to congregate in person, not for school, not for work, but for an annual Halloween celebration around the alleyways of Itaewon. So I'm watching this from the international news. It's really interesting because we're thinking, oh, here Korea was like the world's leader in fighting COVID, and then this happens. And so it really was a shock to us as we were watching this happen and the kind of image that was putting on in our minds about what was going on in Korea. Institutionalized culprits for this mass death continue to hide corporate and state roles in allowing this tragedy to happen. For instance, police and EMS forces that were present in past years were mysteriously redirected, as I mentioned earlier. Routine public foot traffic signs and other safety barricades were not installed. Poorly engineered alleyways, so you see the alleyway on the left side here, where that particular crowd crash happened. It should have been reconstructed years before to better accommodate overcrowding that happened and was left in disrepair. Private businesses, so if you look at that same image where those three signs are of the Itaewon Memorial, that building has actually been pushed outside regulations, public safety regulations. So these private businesses expanded their utility rooms into narrow alleyways, and also on top of that, subway egress was not redirecting traffic as it had done in previous years. So all of these things are not highly visible to the media, causing this different kind of opinion about Itaewon. Their survivors request the incident be called a tragedy and not a disaster. They asked for their stories to not be conflated or exploited for political gain, bringing attention to their differentiation from Seoul. This past spring, President Yoon vetoed the Democratic Party's request to create a special counsel and a fresh round of investigations. That was halted. The girl who wrote the memoir, the author Yu, she said that her participation in the Seoul disaster documentary was also halted at the time. And so these things, unlike powers of nature that are made to appear as major acts in Seoul, this public silencing of Itaewon shows a more thorough obfuscation of systematic public safety failures, reducing innocent civilians of Itaewon into main perpetrators of their own demise. So just by way of conclusion, I'm just going to cut off my paper here and just show you some of the images that I saw as kind of artistic renditions of youth mourning. And so on the left side, you see those on my front slide, this image of the butterflies that the children are creating in the Seoul memory classroom. And I thought this one on the bottom was really quite striking. You got that? I asked the student about what this meant, and he said that he was pointing to the X sign, and I realized, oh my gosh, he realizes the stay put order in Seoul, and he kind of encapsulated that in image next to a people-occupied taeguki. And then on the right side, you got the image of that I saw when I first came into understanding the Itaewon tragedy that was created by a number of students, university students in Korea. And in that image, this is that blown up, there's a lot of indescript writing that kind of replicates the temporary memorial that was put in Itaewon, but one right here, it says here, "It's not your fault," which I think is really quite telling. So these deathscapes, they demonstrate this undemocratic historical present in the state's neglect of to secure safe public infrastructure and societal pressures that prohibit community care for politically marginalized, minoritized populations in South Korea.
Thank you so much for your insightful and inspiring presentations. So can we give them one more round of applause? Thank you. To continue our conversation, we have two discussants responding to their designated presenters. Could you join us on stage, please? So we have two discussants. We have Professor Sung Hae-young from Religious Studies here at SNU, and Jung Hyun-ju from Environmental Studies at SNU faculty. So they have 5 minutes for their response and comments. And after that, if time allows, I'm going to open the floor to the questions from the audience. Who's going to go first? You go first. Yeah. Professor.
Hello, good morning. It's a very honor for me to participate in this great session. Well, I'm supposed to give some comments and thought, particularly for your Professor Gao's presentation. So, I was really inspired and listened very carefully of all your 3 presentations this morning. So, Professor Gao's talk on K-pop gave me really great insights to me, especially her provocative question at the end of her presentation about what it means by Koreanness. Does K-pop really represent Koreanness? So her doubt, I greatly agree with your doubt on whether K-pop is losing its originality because it nowadays it increasingly pursues some global recognition, and particularly Capital 11 News. So despite, for example, despite their global popularity, the dynamite that you showed, the music video in your presentation, since Dynamite, for example, a lot of BTS old fans complained about, it doesn't sound like really BTS, it's just a Western song, kind of ordinary Western songs, and so they are losing their originality. So because all songs, as far as I know, had been produced by some of the members till Dynamite. But after that, after gaining their global popularity, their original characters is kind of decreasing in their song production. So I somehow agree with that. But for me, there's still some gap, not really great, but some gaps between what domestic and Asian audiences like and what the most Western audiences like still. So managing the balance between them may guarantee the success, the level of success of K-pop for a while. That's what I think. And I think the merit of K-pop and Hallyu in general so far has been their ability to deliver as a translator some kind of a Western material in Asian ways, some interesting ways. So their ability to perform as a cultural translator in this scene, I think may really determine the level of success and their sustainability in the future, I think. So in other words, the K-pop and Hallyu in general have offered the moderately westernized alternatives to Asian market. That's right. That's I think that some components of their success. But if they lose that character, however, even if they gain some global popularity, I agree with you that the future of K-wave, Hallyu, is uncertain. But I was really inspired by one of the points that you mentioned in your presentation was that Hallyu is not really a genre K-pop is not a genre, but it's more like a production system. So you mentioned about it. So because it outsources all its components all over the world, right? So this made me really think about what Koreanness is and how it is constructed. Excuse me. I think the boundaries and the core identity of K-pop are still changing. So I'm not quite sure what it. Well, to me, the K-pop is K-pop not because it really represents Koreanness, but because it is called K-pop. You know, so but somehow the strength of the K-pop has been its negotiable ability to, to manage all different sources in some kind of in unique ways. So not because their genuine originality comes from its Koreanness or inside Korea, but rather its ability to stretch out the boundaries of different components of music, I think. So it represents somehow Western material and also some contemporary Korean culture and some Asian modernity all at the same time. So it is mosaic, and it is kind of mixture of all of these different things. So well, we'll see where it goes. So I obviously, the one thing for sure is that I'm not quite sure what really makes K-pop really Korean, but it's somehow cosmopolitan, somehow Korean, somehow Asian, but the mixture, the ability to mix all these different components is the strength of K-pop so far. So we'll see where it goes. So thank you for your presentation.
Nice to see you. My name is Young-sung, and I teach at the Department of Religious Studies. It is great honor and pleasure to be part of this wonderful project. Even I have a chance to make two comments on this paper. Yeah, the first one for Dr. Sarpati. It was fascinating to see how Korean shamanism is undergoing drastic changes in situations where the identity of everything, including politics, religions, and family, is being questioned. Particularly, through the 4 real cases, you have captured the characteristic of Korean shamanism as it forms a new identity that transcends traditional boundaries like regions, races, and etc. I believe this study will provide great insight and inspiration, not only in religious studies, but in various other fields as well. Additionally, I was very impressed by how the author skillfully maintained the scholarly objectivity while showing empathy towards the 4 mudang. In this respect, I believe this research will make a significant contribution to the contemporary Korean studies. The 4 shamans reveal a different aspect of Korean shamanism compared to the past. Lee Hae-kyung, the first one, shows religious leadership. The second one, Mudang Bang, attempts to provide meditation sessions to outsiders. And Andrea demonstrates universality by crossing regional boundaries, having come from Germany to Korea, and becoming a shaman. The shaman, Jennifer, the last one, emphasized the identity that runs through Korean shamanism as a whole, namely the correct understanding of Korean shamanism. To me, these characteristics seem to indicate the Korean shamanism is becoming more similar to organized traditional religions. I would like to hear more about the future direction of changes in Korean shamanism in the context of institutionalization. For Dr. Hwang, although the Seoul and Itaewon are tragedies we would rather not remember, I would like to deeply appreciate you for addressing 2 events that must be properly remembered and mourned. These two incidents make us reconsider the role of the state and politics at a fundamental level. It was shocking that many young people lost their lives and that so many witnessed in real time through media how the government's law failed to function properly during the process. However, what horrified us even more was the fact that politics, rather than helping to resolve the collective trauma, became the main cause of amplifying it. As Dr. Wang pointed out, these two events, including the mourning, remain ongoing issues for us. I have two questions. First one, so although various religions, in your paper, you said the various religions participate in the memorial, but the shamanic rites were ignored even by the victims' families. I would like to hear more about the reasons and backgrounds about this, behind this. The second one, tragic events inevitably evoke strong emotions in us. I am curious about how you as a scholar have managed to maintain an appropriate sense of distance while continuously dealing with these two events. I think that you are actively participating not only in research, but also kind of a healing process of the event. And I am also I was an elementary school boy when I was in Gwangju in 1980. So I'm really curious about how can we maintain the appropriate kind of a distance from the tragic events, yeah, as a scholar. Yeah, thank you for your wonderful. Yeah.
So each of you have 5 minutes for your response. So we'll go to first out here.
Hello? Yeah? Hello? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your thoughtful comments. Yeah, I guess maybe I'll just put some other thoughts out there, and I'd love to hear other people's responses as well. So, people do ask about what makes K-pop. Is it Korean? Is it the process? And so I don't want to be too negative or too hard on, it's losing its Koreanness or anything, because I think it hasn't been made just by Koreans, just for Koreans for a really long time. But I do worry that companies are really trying hard to chase what they think Westerners want, that they're actually not giving Westerners what Westerners liked about K-pop to begin with. So, and they're struggling with this too. And this is why I like to talk to different kinds of companies, and even companies like Webtoon, they're struggling with this too. Because current fans of K-pop in the West actually like the fact that there are Koreans and there's Korean content and they speak Korean and things are shot in Korea. They like that a lot. And so if you replace everything, I have had people tell me, then what's the point, right? I can just go watch some other group. I don't really need to go to K-pop to get that kind of content. And I do see like HYBE's new group, Cat's Eye, they're not doing so well. And there's again other groups are coming, so we'll see what happens. I worry again that I'm not sure they're trying to. I think it's great to maintain some Korean identity in it. That's what people liked about it. Yeah, and then to chase it or to sort of say we're not going to do this anymore. Personally, I just think it's gone too far. I mean, artists should produce whatever they want. I don't mean that they don't have the right to produce whatever they want, but in a way, I feel like people I talk to, they're overthinking it. They're overthinking it a lot. Like they've actually don't talk to American audiences, but they imagine Americans want this, so we're going to do this too. And then you end up with a really bad product, actually. So there are lots of K-pop songs with very poor English. I mean, just really, not just, just ridiculous, poor English, and then you can't watch it because you're embarrassed to watch it. But if they had just sung it in Korean, it would have been a pretty good song, right? Like, they ruined it by trying to chase this. And that's what I see more and more of, and it actually, I want to tell all of them to stop doing it. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for your kind and generous support of my work. I like my work. You asked about the institutionalization of shamanism. I don't know if it's about the cosmopolitanization, but people have discussed the government system of 인간 문화재 as part of this institutionalization, but it seems that the vernacular is living beside this government system that is trying to homogenize style and, institutionalize them. So the shamans themselves, they do what they want, and that still remains vernacular. But in my other work, not in this paper, I've been doing ethnography in shaman goods stores. It's the place where the manmulsa, where the shamans go to buy the statues and the paintings and the bells. And I think the stores are homogenizing, in a way, the tradition more than the government. So it comes from the grassroots, because there are several very prominent stores and store owners that became like very knowledgeable. So if I sit there, I can hear the mudang calling them and asking them various things. And the shop owners, they know how this general has to look and what outfit she needs for this particular ritual. So they become very knowledgeable, and it's not institutionalized officially. But because so many people come to the same stores, I think in the future we'll see more and more of the same artifacts. Doesn't mean they'll say the same words in the ritual, but at least in the material aspect, I think the commercialization, the mass production, like catalogs of mushindo, of the paintings. So if you have a catalog that kind of limits the variety of painting that can be done. But then the kunmudang, the one that have a lot of influence and power, they try to have their own painters, for example, paint their individual, unique pieces because the other mudang buy the stuff in the store. So, it's very difficult to institutionalize because there is no, compared to Buddhism and Christianity, you don't have degrees or steps in the way that are formal and diplomas and things like that. Even the organizations, they don't offer standards. So the standards are in the government assignment, but the daily life, they do what they want. But maybe, who knows, about the future, it's hard to tell. I'll ask the mudang about the future. They know, they can divine the future.
Thank you so much, Professor Song, for those two really important questions. I think you get at the heart of some of the things I've been thinking about with this paper and with this project. So why are they ignored? I don't know if the intentionality of not knowing about this is not something I can tell for sure. They're telling me they don't exist. And so why are they saying this? Specifically, what my feeling was, and this is just a gut feeling. When I talked to the Seoul families about it, they had a kind of a very adamant position that they don't exist. And that really strong emotion that they had in response to the question was something that was very telling to me. And so for me, my guess is that one, because of the politics around Park Geun-hye, Seoul, and the impeachment process, that dirty politics that surrounded that event, I think they're still working that out, trying to separate themselves from anything that's associated with political corruption. So I think my guess is that might be one of the reasons, that culture of distance from a shamanic community and anything that may not be considered proper forms of political processes is something they might still be working through. The other question about, well, I think with the Itaewon families, it's just still too new. They're just, in order for them to gather and amass a kungut will require a lot of capital. And they're just still a little bit too new. So although the Muhyang Munajé Manchinder were there for the beginning part of the process to actually have the bereaved families collaborate to have an annual ritual would still require a lot more than they have, I think, at their disposal right now. And a good example of that is to see when I was at the International Women's Day march in Gwanghwamun this past spring. A bereaved mother from Itaewon had to force herself onto the speaker list to talk about her issues. She wasn't a part of the agenda. And so the Itaewon tragedy is something that I think is still not as much in the public eye, and they're really fighting for that. But the other point about about emotional distance, it's a really interesting question because as a historian, I work mostly through archives, but then I'm working also on an anthropological topic, and so I attend some of these rituals myself. And when you attend the rituals, especially the rituals that are working around mass grief, mass deaths, there's no way not to be emotionally drawn in. Everybody in the room is bawling, right? When I was at the Jeju Sasam ritual, I was, again, bawling, although I've seen it so many times, right? Because the way they talk about the way these families died and how and their suffering, you can't help but be a part of it. And the interesting and the most heartbreaking thing about especially what I saw with the Seoul disaster, catastrophe, was that those parents, without that kind of a ritual, they are so incredibly composed, showing the very neutral face to the public, talking through the most difficult issues, that I had to cry in the elevator. I had to go home. I had to go back to the hotel and just bawl my way out of that in private, which I think is what a lot of us researchers do, because there isn't a public space for that public collective mourning, which is a huge problem.
Thank you. Could you give our respondents a round of applause? Thank you. Now we just want to, I think we have some minutes for taking questions from the audience, right? 10 minutes? 14 minutes. So we got 14 minutes. So I think you spark a lot of interest, and I'm sure plenty of questions from audience. So we can take some questions from you guys, maybe a few.
Okay, thank you. Keith Howard from London. Can I just address Leora and Grace? If we take Hannett's view of cosmopolitanism as a sort of perspective, then whose perspective is it? So is it us looking in from outside as scholars or the people who are actually involved? Now that concerns me because I've been doing a lot of work with African musicians in Europe. This is not sort of black music in North America. Where African musicians resist the term cosmopolitanism completely because they say we're African musicians. The famous quote of Youssou N'Dour of, if you go to Dakar in Senegal, you hear all the Western sounds, you hear everything there. That's part of our culture. So why should we be different? Why should we call it cosmopolitanism or something? And I've got into a lot of hot water over working with Zimbabwean musicians who really resist that term and said, you cannot use it about us. And so I don't, and I'm told by my colleagues, you must, because they're not really Zimbabwean. Problem. So that sort of term, how useful is it, really, when we're talking about shamanism? And if we think of it as the perspective again, when we come to K-pop, when was K-pop ever Korean? So if you go back to the sort of Pongchak Trot stuff and Yuhenga and the connections to Enka, and Koreans will know the sort of Wesek idea, the foreign color, or Soteji and his influence from people like Cypress Hill, Rage Against the Machine. When was it Korean? So the perspective from Korea may well be that Dynamite and everything else is Korean, or by some in Korea, let's say. The perspective of foreigners who are fans of K-pop is rather different about what is Korean. So again, how useful is that differentiation? Thanks.
Okay, Professor Bordy.
So I'll try to do it short, but it's a complex question. I'll use the two perspectives that you offer. So if we take the theoretical academic perspective about cosmopolitanism, so I didn't have time to go really deep into the theory, but the cosmopolitan person is supposed to encapsulate within themselves both or different cultures, not just two, sometimes a few. And actually the term came up when I didn't have this term in mind, but when I talked one time with Young about her work with foreigners and how she talks to the spirit, so she told me, I meet so many spirits in my life, Anyway, I meet Gengis Khan, Japanese spirit, Chinese spirit, so I can meet Western spirits. She doesn't see the this kind of bridge between meeting this and that people. So she actually incorporates in her view different worlds. That's how the term came up to me. And about their perspective, so I think they don't see themselves less Koreans because they work in different worlds, because for them, and the term means you deal with different worlds. Anyway, they deal with different worlds, For them, the gods, the ancestors, everybody is different worlds they incorporate in their bodies, physically. They're embodied. So getting these foreigners doesn't seem to bother, at least definitely the four people that I discussed this in deep. And in their case, about their liking or not liking the term, luckily, the four of them are in communication with me, so actually they've seen the article before it was published, and it's published after their comments. And none of them commented about the term. They like the term cosmopolitan. I think, and maybe it means in Korea something else to be a cosmopolitan than it would mean in the UK for them. I think they liked it. I didn't even bother about the term so much because they commented about many other things that are not in the article, and I had to take stuff. But cosmopolitan, they kind of liked it, I think. For them, it means like a world person. Some of them call themselves global shamans when they talk to foreigners. Pangun Mi, she said, I'm a global shaman. Andrea says she's a global shaman. Jenny says, I'm a Korean American, proud in my both heritages. So I don't see that they have a problem with the term, but it's a good question. I'll ask them next time.
Okay, next question. Professor Kikau. Oh yeah, cool. And then Professor Kikau.
I'll just be quick. Thank you for your comment. Of course, you're right about other influences. The change is the actual people working on this. So I have heard that Korean producers have trouble working in the discipline if they don't speak English. So the way the whole thing is organized is actually changing very, very quickly. So that means Korean producers have to learn English to write K-pop songs, right? It's not, I simplified it by talking about people, but if you look at the list of songwriters, it's completely different from even 5 years ago. So it's part of it, and one of my students here is studying the workforce, but the workforce is changing, that Koreans from Korea might have trouble working in this industry because they are chasing other things. The in-house writers, so Kenzie used to write for SM a lot of the songs, but you can see that it's changing. So I think the kind of people, the number of people, the way things are organized has changed really, really dramatically. So anyhow.
Thank you very much. My question is for Professor Sarfati. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I really appreciate your idea of cosmopolitanism as a perspective, and especially the idea that cosmopolitanism is a way to include otherness in your identity. The question of shamanism is important because it's a test for the inclusion of otherness. And my question is, if shamanism is a test for understanding cosmopolitanism, it's much easier to do this with some societies in which shamanism is a part of storytelling, of their own tradition. And if some K-dramas are today the Trojan horse to introduce shamanism, I'm just thinking on Hotel de Luna. It's a K-drama, it's full of shamans references, true or invented. This is not the matter. But this can be easy to understand in America, in North America, in Latin America, in which there are very strong indigenous movements to improve shamanism. But it's, it's not easy to understand for European audiences. In Europe, shamanism is not part of our memories, historical memories, ethnological or anthropological history. So, to what extent you can explain the success of these K-dramas in Europe? Is the new Orientalism? Is a way to have a new spirituality? How do you explain this? Thank you.
Well, it's a huge question. I have to write a book, but but no, I have a small I have a short answer. I will. The short answer would be that actually, when we read about Korean shamanism and we read the text, it's mythology, right? But when you come to the ritual, while the shaman is reciting all this mythology, everybody is on their cell phone. Even the Koreans, they don't focus on the mythology. They come to heal. They come to get the future divined. They come to get some ancestor pacified. In the K-drama, they also solve murder cases, but it's all very practical. So I think the practical aspect that is not new, it's not cosmopolitan. I mean, for Koreans too, us as scholars, we like to read the text and understand the story and the mythology, but the people that go to shaman, they don't pay 10 million won to hear a drama. They'll go to the theater to hear pansori. So they go because they need something. And when they need something, that's something the Western audience can understand, right? There is an unsolved murder case, like let's bring the spirit and she'll tell us who killed her. That's something everybody can relate to. It's like magic. People would like to have things solved by magic. And yes, it's kind of Orientalist, especially if you look at Pamyua. It's exaggerated. But people expect media to be exaggerated. Nobody would film me eating dinner, right? So people expect it to be overemphasized. I think that's why and it's beautiful, and the music, shamanism.
Okay, so we'll take one more question. Any student here? Can we take some student questions? At least, also student. So two more questions, one for you and the other from student side.
I am a very oldest student here, actually.
Yeah. Please. So please try to be as concise as possible so we're going to have...
Okay, fine. I mean, Professor Sarfati, I don't know how clearly I pronounce the name, but anyhow, I was very much impressed with your presentation, particularly the concept of cosmopolitanism. But then my question to you is this. To the extent that it is let's say, limited to the shaman world in terms of transcending, let's say, geographical location. In other words, from a political scientist perspective, to me, we always approach cosmopolitanism in terms of location. But then, thinking about the nature of the shamanism, I think I tend to think that it is more or less unique to shaman world to transcend the local physical limitations. Am I short enough?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Quick response,
you said it
great.
perfectly. Shamanism is about different worlds, so yeah.
Okay.
I think it fits nicely into the description. But yeah, people can, debate the geography. But we have the shaman that travel. So all the shamans that you've seen travel and do ritual in different places, not just in Korea. So.
Okay, thank you. From our student side.
Hi, I'm Bu Young from the University of Chicago. I have a question for Grace and Professor Huang, Professor Gao. Professor Gao, nice to meet you. I'm So-Yoon's research colleague, and it's so nice to see you. But I have a question also, especially since a lot of your research sites intersect with mine as well, and WKCU is one of my research sites. So my question is about your provocative question that you asked at the end, which is whether the association between K-pop and Korea, is it dissipating? And I wanted to ask, more of like, what is this association between Korea, K-pop and Koreanness, and how you see it being played amongst people that you study? Because I sometimes see like producers, choreographers, they see it as a racial one. Oh, people, Korean skin, Korean people, Korean bodies dancing. Other people say it's linguistic, it's the layering of Korean language on top. Other people say it's cultural, like the representation of cultural stuff. So what exactly, you see, like how are these different things like intersecting? And then for Professor Huang,
I think
sorry.
we can continue conversation with the Professor Wang. So can you respond to his question, please?
Okay, I'll just be quick. I don't have an answer. So I just want to bring the question out there that every permutation, I go through this with my students as well, because they have a definition of K-pop, but we cannot nail it. Like, is it, I think it's probably more about the trainee system and the way people are organized, but I'm not even so sure about that. So I just feel like if you pay attention to this, it is changing. It changes by the month. So I want people that study K-pop to sort of become aware and be up to date on these things. But the companies are trying every permutation that you can imagine, and they're going to call it K-pop if it helps them. And if it doesn't help them, like Mr. Ban Shi-hyuk wants to get away from that term. So he wants to use the word global pop. So he doesn't even like the word K-pop anymore.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's wrap it up. So give our speakers one more round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I have one small comment before you leave for the break. I just want to make sure each team, we have 7 teams, research clusters. So each team have more researchers than the presenters. So our teams, we have 9 members. So there are papers that haven't been presented today. So I just want to make sure there are other faculty members here and other universities working on the same team with different themes. So probably after today, we can continue conversation on this, right? If you're interested, just let us know. We can share our research agendas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to our panel for an excellent session. Thank you. You can go in. Yeah. Now I'm sure we are all starting to feel hungry, right? So we have prepared lunch boxes for you today. So you can pick up your lunch in the lobby just outside the conference hall and turn around the hall. And you are welcome to enjoy your lunch in Samik Hall, which is located right beside the lobby. Enjoy your meal, and I will see you back here at 12:50, not 1 o'clock, 12:50. The next session will begin 12:50. Okay? Thank you. See you soon. Thank you so much, Grace.
I hope it was okay.
Thank you. It was wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.